2.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Facebook Live career chat. We'll be discussing networking for the introvert. My name is Anna Valegia. I am the Director of Alumni Career Services for the NC State Alumni Association. And I'm very excited today to have Dr. Jen McGinnis with us. So just to give you a little bit of information about her, and she will then get us started with the topic. So Jen is currently the Talent Program Manager for Associate Development at Red Hat, headquartered right here in Raleigh, North Carolina. In her role, Jen develops talent strategies and programs designed to unlock the potential of Red Hat associates across the globe. These programs include associate experience, onboarding, competency modeling, and performance and development. Jen holds her master and PhD degrees in industrial organizational psychology from the great NC State University, as well as her senior professional in human resources certification. So welcome. We are so happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
All right. So just to get us started, I think it's really important for this topic to have some definitions, because I think there is some misconception. So just for us to start, why don't you just help us define introversion?
Absolutely. So this is very exciting for me to answer this question because I get to go back into some of my studies as a psychologist and talk about a guy named Carl Jung. And Carl is the person who is often regarded as kind of creating these concepts of introversion and extroversion.
Mm-hmm.
He was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, and he originally thought that introversion and extroversion were sort of categories to describe people. So you were either one or you were the other. We now know that introversion and extroversion really exists on a continuum. So you can either be really extreme introvert, really extreme extrovert, or somewhere in between.
Mm-hmm.
And this theory of human personality is something that really underpins a lot of our common models that we talk about when we think about personality. Like the Big Five model is a very well-researched and well-supported model of personality. And it's also a framework that's used in a lot of common assessments, like the Myers-Briggs type indicator. People love that to help them better understand themselves and others. So you see this infused in many different models of personality and also assessments that you can take to better understand your personality.
Absolutely. So I think when we think about introversion, it's also helpful to kind of understand extroversion as well. So can you just kind of talk to us a little bit about the differences?
Absolutely. So I think probably the simplest way to understand the differences between introversion and extroversion is to really ask yourself this question: from where do I get my energy and how do I recharge? So if you're an introvert, your answer to that question is you probably get more energy from spending time alone and kind of quiet thought and reflection. If you're an extrovert, you probably get your energy and you recharge by actually spending time with others in more of a social setting. So that's, I would say, the biggest difference between introverts and extroverts. Generally speaking, extroverts tend to be more action oriented. They tend to prefer more breadth of knowledge and influence. And introverts, on the other hand, they prefer more of that depth of knowledge and influence. They tend to be more introspective. They try to focus more on kind of really significant, meaningful interactions and relationships with a fewer number of people, whereas extroverts prefer perhaps to have a wider network of interaction. So those are some of the most common differences I think you see.
Very good. So, and I know there are just a lot, I feel like, misconceptions of introverts. So could you just kind of tell us what you wish people knew about introverts? Because a lot of people are like, oh, someone who's introverted is shy, but actually that's not the same thing. Someone who's extroverted can actually be shy. So I guess just kind of talk to us about some of the misconceptions for someone who's introverted.
I think introversion is one of those things that for whatever reason has become so negatively connotated. And so I do like to start with like a Mythbusters. And as you said, one of the myths about introverts is that they are shy or they are quiet. I think that all just comes from our natural tendency to want to make a lot of attributions for people's behavior and understand why they behave the way that they do. They don't want to be alone all the time. It's not coming from a place of low confidence. So I think those are some of the more common misconceptions that you would see. Extroverts, on the other hand, they tend to have a reputation of being very outgoing, being very opinionated. And that might be true of a lot of extroverts, but it also might just be how they're showing up to other people.
Right. Right. And I think one thing that we have discussed sort of off camera is that we live in this extroverted world. I feel like people almost expect that of us. So one thing that I wanted to ask you about, or what are some of the challenges that you've seen people who maybe identify as an extrovert or as an introvert in the workplace? So what are some of those challenges?
Yeah, I was doing some reflecting on this question. And as you said, Anna, we definitely live in a world that I would say caters more to extroverts. And you see this in a lot of different professional settings. So networking events could be one example, but you can also see it in the workplace, in team meetings, in training sessions, in brainstorming sessions. So some examples of what that could look like. We might not make a clear purpose for the meeting or send an agenda or materials to review in advance.
Yeah.
During the meeting, we don't start by creating norms so that everyone feels like they have a way that they can participate in a way that feels most comfortable and aligned with their personality. We don't give people opportunities to kind of take a pause, reflect, revisit concepts as we're brainstorming. So these are, I think, just some of the common challenges that introverts might experience in the workplace in ways that are maybe more oriented to those with extroverted personalities.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So, and I think we've kind of talked about sometimes there's this negative connotation. So let's talk about how introversion can really be very positive in the workplace.
Yep. So the way I think about this is, and I think we've all been there, have you ever been in a meeting where you can just tell that the majority of the people in that room are extroverts?
Yes.
Okay. So things that you might experience in that scenario are a lot of out loud thinking. People are probably doing more talking than they're doing listening. People might be interrupting and speaking over one another. There's a lot of energy in the room, but that energy is not always directed towards a place of taking a pause, reflecting. And so I think that that is one of the kind of common things that you see in the workplace, and where I think introverts are really positive is they bring that balance. We live in such a fast-paced, externally facing world that without the benefit of having introverts who can really kind of take that pause, reflect, do some introspection, a lot of that breeds great creativity and innovation, and that's what we need to be successful, both professionally and personally. And so I always try to reiterate that I think when we think about introverts, we don't always think about those positive aspects because of those negative connotations, but there's so much balance that they can bring to both personal and professional relationships.
Yeah, and I think too, for someone who is extroverted, another thing besides just the getting energy is also the fact that they sometimes like to talk out their ideas. And so they might show all their cards on the table and have all of their good ideas are out. You know, whereas someone who's introverted, they might just kind of process and think through what might be a good solution, right? And not everyone can know what they say. You can't read their cards. So I do think that is something too that can be beneficial and really positive, is that someone who is introverted can really reflect and think through all of the solutions without everybody knowing what it looks like.
Yeah, and giving people time to actually revisit that. So it's a great idea in the meeting itself or in the next meeting that you have. We have a lot of teams that we're working on projects and we're constantly meeting with the same group of people. Carve out time to revisit conversations that happened before. What do you have to add? Is there anything we need to revisit? This is the kind of thing that you can do to really make sure that you're creating an inclusive environment for introverts to be able to contribute in ways that feel best and make the most sense based on their personality.
Absolutely. So one thing that I really want to kind of dive into now, since the title is really the networking. So just in general, I mean, you've had a lot of experience in human resources, talent development. So how important is networking, just kind of generally speaking?
I mean, I think networking is very important. And I want to start by just saying that we sometimes think about networking as being, you go to these very large events with a lot of people that you don't know, you feel like you're a number, you get lost in the crowd, and that's not all of what networking is. So I think part of what I want to do today is talk a little bit about what are some of the different ways you can network and what does networking really look like in those contexts. But it is a huge part of our professional careers and personal as well. well.
Mhm.
And we do often talk a lot about, getting jobs. It has a lot to do with not so much who you know, but who knows you.
Right.
And I have found that to be true in the Raleigh area, especially it's a very networked community here. So I think that it is really important, but I also want to make sure people understand that networking can be something that you really customize to your personality and your preferences.
I think that's a fabulous point. I'm excited to kind of dive in and see what some of those tips and tricks are. So when I think one thing that you said is like there's multiple ways to network. So one thing I just want to touch on, which isn't the main topic that I want to discuss, but it's something I think is important, is networking online.
Yeah.
Because I think that's something that maybe it could be easier for someone because they're behind the computer and maybe doing things, or it could still be very uncomfortable because it's harder to make a connection with somebody virtually. So just kind of talk to me about your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think networking online can be a very effective networking technique, regardless of, if you're introvert or an extrovert. One of the things, so I think two main things I would emphasize there. And the first is really something that I believe is very important with networking in general, and that is quality over quantity.
Yes.
So I think many of us live in a world where we probably get many LinkedIn invitations every single day from people we don't know, and you connect with them and that's it. The relationship doesn't continue from there. So what I would encourage everyone to think about when you're networking online is always go into that with a specific objective or purpose.
Yep.
Know what you want to do next in your career. Where are the companies that you're interested in working for? What do you see yourself doing in that next phase of your career? Look for people who are doing those things or who work for those companies that you're interested in working for. Be targeted in how you do that. And even better, if you know someone in your network who is already connected to them, ask them to help make that introduction. It's a great starting off point. It's something that's much more meaningful than just sending somebody an invitation. But hopefully it's something that gets you noticed more, and it gives you an opportunity to really strengthen that connection and really see how that could be explored further in the future.
Absolutely. And we do have a list of questions that we're going to kind of be going through, but absolutely, if you have anything that you would like to ask us, Jen would be more than happy to answer some of those questions. So now we kind of want to get into what we're here for, is talking about those in-person networking events. And so I think, like you said, maybe it's something on a small scale or large scale, but I want to kind of break it down a little bit. So let's start with those like big networking events. So for someone who is introverted, how would you suggest kind of getting prepared, getting excited or ready to go to an event like that? Just mentally prepared.
Absolutely. So one thing I would recommend is spend as much time in preparation as you can. Have an elevator speech. And this is something that you would be encouraged to do if you were going into a job interview, to just really introduce yourself to someone. But going into a networking event, really think about how would you introduce yourself? Give an overview of your professional career, but then talk a little bit about what your goals are. Talk about why you're at that event. What's interesting you about that? Just be ready for that. If you can go in with having some of those talking points ready, takes a little bit of the pressure off and knowing what to say as an introduction to get things started.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of those ways to prepare? I know it's kind of like you build more confidence as you prepare for some of these events, but what are some maybe best practices for just getting ready for those sort of events?
Yep, absolutely. So one of the things we know about introverts is we have a tendency to really be drained when we're spending a lot of time in social settings that are more externally focused. So if you know you have a big networking event and you are more of an introverted individual, make sure that you're not spending time out of that event doing things that are going to drain your energy. Really build up that energy bank as much as you can in preparation for that event. So really save up that energy and remove as much unnecessary stress as possible. And what I mean by that is take some time to research, where is this meeting going to be? What do I need to do as far as directions to get there? What am I going to wear? What kinds of things do I need to take with me? Am I taking business cards or copies of my resume? What does that look like? Get all of that sorted out and put all of that to the side, so that's not a place that you need to invest any of your energy. So really just kind of taking through, those types of things. Leave early, get there early, give yourself time to just sort of sit in your car, take a pause, take a few deep breaths before you go in. That hectic pace is something that we waste a lot of energy on sometimes, and the energy is better directed at the networking event.
Yeah. And one thing that I like that you mentioned is this energy bank, because I often think of it being sort of like a rechargeable battery, right? So for someone who is introverted, I mean, the person might want to just have a full battery charge, right? Before they go to a networking event. So like you said, maybe be cautious about what you're doing beforehand before you attend. So I think that's a great point. And so it's just one of those things, if you think about introversion as a battery, maybe you start off full and you might get, it might get sucked out of you pretty quickly, but then once you're to the point where you need a recharge, that's when you can back away, sort of reflect and get back into that. That alone time.
Yeah, one of my closest friends also identifies as an introvert, and she'll talk a lot about how maybe she's facilitating like an all-day workshop at work, and at the end of that, she just needs to come back home or back to her hotel room and just have some time by herself and decompress. And that is great self-awareness.
Absolutely.
And if that feels right for you, then just honor that and make sure you're giving yourself that opportunity to recharge.
Yeah, and I think the self-awareness piece is so important, because at the end of the day, you have to know what's comfortable for you. Right? So
absolutely.
Thinking of maybe a larger networking event, any specific tactics for kind of working the room, and what would that look like?
Yeah. So I think as you enter that event, take a second to take a step back and just take it all in. You know, don't feel like you have to jump in immediately. You know, give yourself to sort of reflect on the setting of the event, take it all in for a moment before you begin to engage. And that's also something that can be helpful, getting there a few minutes early so you feel like you have the capacity to do that. The other thing I would emphasize, and this is something that's maybe not as comfortable or natural for introverts, but be that person. So what I mean by that is it's very common that you'll go to these networking events and you'll see someone standing off by themselves. Sometimes that might be us. And I think we can all agree that's not a comfortable place to be in. And so be willing to make the connection with those people. And I was thinking back on one of my closest personal and professional relationships started because I went up to somebody in my PE class in college and asked her to be my workout buddy. And since then we have traveled together, we have worked together. It's a great networking story. And so be willing to do that. You know, it's something that we would want other people to do for us if we feel uncomfortable. So if you feel comfortable doing that, it's a great approach to try.
Yeah, that's
the other thing I would say is be present. Know, you know, once you start engaging with someone, really listen to what they have to say. The more information people share with you in the context of a networking event gives you more opportunity to make that connection. They'll probably share something with you that is an experience you've had, or something that you're interested in doing, something maybe personal about themselves that you can connect with, where they went to school, for example. So really being present, and that's something that extroverts do really well, is listen, be present, reflect.
Absolutely. So, and with kind of a large networking room, I think one thing that you had mentioned earlier was the quality over quantity, right? So it's not something to where if you do have this large room of people that you have to go and meet everybody. So any advice on maybe selectively choosing who to kind of exert your energy to in those moments?
That is a hard thing to figure out, I think. But one of the things I would stress is try to do as much research about the event as possible before you go in. And it's not uncommon now with some of the networking that we do, especially when it's aligned more to a particular career field, where you might even know what companies are going to be there, who might be representing those companies at that event. A lot of times we see events shared through Facebook, like today's session, and you can see who's interested, who's going. So give yourself some preparation opportunity there and see if you can find out who's going to be there. And maybe, I don't want to say target those people, but have a game plan going in.
Absolutely.
But also be committed to just letting things evolve organically. I think sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have a particular strategy, and that can really waste a lot of our energy. So just trying to be calm and natural and let things evolve organically as well.
Yeah. How do you feel about, though, I mean, setting maybe a certain goal for yourself or establishing a purpose, because then maybe there is kind of a reason that you're there, and you're not just kind of, you know, kind of going about it in a way that you don't know what you want to get out of it, right?
Absolutely.
So any thoughts to that at all?
No, I love that thought. I think purpose is important in any kind of networking that you do, regardless of the setting that you're doing it in. And if you can make a goal to connect reasonably with 2 or 3 people, and then make sure that you're making that commitment after the event to follow up with them in a meaningful way. Maybe you connect with them on LinkedIn then and say, hey, I really enjoyed our conversation. Was wondering if you'd like to get coffee sometime or just connect over the phone. I'd love to learn more about what you do.
Yep.
I think those can always be really meaningful activities, and they're also really reasonable goals to set for yourself.
Absolutely. And keep in mind that we are definitely open to questions coming in, but we'll just kind of keep on plugging away. So now let's move a little bit from the really large networking event to maybe a smaller event, or like even a business meeting, because I know that sometimes is something that we don't think about either. So kind of talk to me about that for maybe someone who's introverted, what that would look like.
Yeah, I think for me, this is where it becomes a little bit easier in an introverted context to really think about how to network. Usually with a business meeting, they tend to have a much more well-defined purpose. So using the example of the Employer Advisory Council through NC State that we're a part of, knowing in advance who's part of that group, having an opportunity to learn more about them in advance, it makes me feel like when I come into that setting that I'm going to know a little bit about who's going to be in that room, and I'm going to be able to start making those connections more easily. So again, the research piece there I think is really important, and I think it's easier to do that in a smaller group setting as well.
Yep. And I think just in general, and this can be experienced by someone who maybe is more introverted or someone more extroverted, but these like awkward moments, it could be in large or small settings, but how do you avoid them, or how do you kind of handle them in the moment? What is an awkward moment? I just think that's always
I know. I was
interesting
thinking about that. And I think silence can be awkward for a lot of people. The great thing about silence is that introverts are much more comfortable with that. Extroverts tend to be the ones that need to fill up that silence. So I think that that's actually something that many people would find awkward, but it's actually something that introverts are probably very well prepared to deal with. And just being listeners and letting other people fill up that space. And I think, it's commitment to recognizing that there is no right or wrong way to do this. And that's why I always stress, maybe you do encounter a situation in a networking event where you're like, oh, I'm not exactly confident with how that went, and I would do that differently next time. That's where that reflection afterwards can be really helpful. And again, something that introverts are really uniquely suited to doing because we tend to be more reflective and introspective.
Yeah. So one thing that you touched on was the whole, like, maybe this quote, awkward silence, right? So how do you, maybe if someone is introverted and they're okay with that silence, but someone who's extroverted is really uncomfortable with it, is there a way to kind of navigate those situations?
Oh gosh, honestly, when I think about interactions in the workplace, I think there are a lot of cases where we're interacting in pairs or in small groups or teams where you do see that really healthy mix. And I think that's where it's really important for us to just make sure that we're structuring things in a way that caters to everyone's personality, and being okay with that silence. I don't think there's anything, wrong with that. And just recognizing that there is value in that, and that by having that silence, we're taking a pause. We might have a new insight that we're getting. We're thinking about what other people are saying, and having an opportunity to respond to that we might not otherwise have.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So one thing that I think is interesting to think about is, what do you feel about going to like multiple networking events versus picking the one? So if somebody is maybe introverted, it's kind of overwhelming to think about a networking event every night of the week, right? So should you try to attend as many as you can and just make all the connections that you can, or is it best to pick and choose?
Yeah. I absolutely think pick and choose. And again, I know we've talked about it a couple of times today, but really quality over quantity. You do not have to have 100 connections. You could have 100 connections and it might not yield a very positive or successful outcome for you. So really think, the clearer you can be on what is it I'm trying to achieve? What is this goal that I have for myself in the next step in my career? Where do I want to work? What do I want to do there? Let that really drive your strategy. It's just like you would do do if you were trying to work on your wellness.
Yep.
You know, have a plan. What is specifically you're targeted at doing, and what can I actually do? What activities, milestones can I engage in to help get me there?
Yep.
The same strategy applies to networking. And our time is so limited as individuals that it doesn't make sense for anyone to be spending every day of the week or even multiple days of the week in a networking event.
Yeah.
The other thing I would stress is view every interaction that you have as an opportunity to network.
Absolutely.
You just never know where those connections are going to come from. The job that I have now at Red Hat is something that came about because of a connection that I made several years ago from somebody that I met in a professional organization who is now my manager at Red Hat, which is awesome. You just never know where your next opportunity is going to come from. So really think differently about what networking is.
Yeah, because it's not like you have to attend one of these really big events. You know, it could be an easy coffee, getting your nails done. I mean, there's different opportunities to be able to make connections. At the end of the day, that's what networking is, right? It's just about making those connections. So I think that's a really good point, is that you don't have to psych yourself up and say, I'm going to attend this networking. It could and should just be a part of your everyday life. Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever gotten a job from attending a very large networking event. You know, it's always come from these more meaningful connections that you see value in and you continue to invest in. And that does feel anxiety provoking sometimes, because it is something that is maybe more of a future oriented approach, but that's why it's so important to be as specific as you can be about what your goals are.
Yeah. Do you think, I'm kind of curious as far as when you think about relationships, for someone who is maybe extroverted and can feel really comfortable making those connections easily, right? Or someone who is introverted who might not make as many connections, but maybe has more time spent with them. You know, any thoughts for managing those two kinds of networks?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll speak more to the introvert side of things, and recognize that these connections that can help you in a professional capacity can come from anywhere. So think about groups that you're already a part of. And when I say groups, I don't necessarily mean large groups. I mean, these are networks that you're already connected to. You might be part of a community organization, a religious organization. You might take your dog to doggy daycare, your children to a preschool, or, you know, be part of PTA, who knows? But you meet people through everyday life who potentially could provide you with that networking opportunity. And you never know what could come up through daily conversation with people. So just being interested in others, I think approaching things with a sense of curiosity. You never know what you're going to learn about someone that might be a next great connection for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So how would you, what advice would you give someone in the business world to help make maybe meetings, presentations, a little bit more inclusive for both, you know, someone who is extroverted and someone who's introverted in the same room?
Yeah, this is a really important question for me, because I do think that there's so much about how we do things that is more catered to an extrovert. So one great strategy, and it's something that should be pretty simple, is think in advance, what is the purpose of this meeting? What is the agenda that we're setting? Is there anything I can provide in advance to give people time to think about? Is there a guiding question that I can ask people to noodle on before they come into this meeting? Introverts will really appreciate that, because it gives us an opportunity to really do some thinking and reflection and feel like we can contribute more in real time during the meeting. During the meeting, giving people time to reflect and respond. So actually carving out time in the agenda where you're taking a pause, you're reflecting, you're revisiting ideas that already came about. That's going to be something that I think is going to feel more natural to an introvert and something that they would appreciate.
Yeah, I think that is a great idea. And I hope that that's something that people can just be more aware of, right? It's that awareness piece again. So just to kind of wrap everything up, what advice would you give somebody who is an introvert living in this extroverted world of ours?
Yeah. So I think for me, I really want to encourage everyone to be themselves. And we talk a lot about how as introverts we'll sometimes fake it and try to be more extroverted, and that's fine, but recognize that as an introvert, you bring a very important balance and very important perspective to this world. And if we tended to operate purely as extroverts all of the time, there would never be any reflection. There would never be any building upon others' ideas. People wouldn't feel listened to.
Yep.
So try to be yourself and recognize that introversion is not a bad thing and that you bring a lot of positive qualities to the table.
Yeah. Well, that is some great information. Thank you so much for just taking some time to talk to us. And thank you everyone who joined us. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. Go Pack.
Yay.